Ah yes, James Bond, 007. To me, Bond represents every man's fantasy. Because every man wants to win. Every man wants to say the right things at the right time. Be suave and sophisticated, get the girl. Every man wants to be number one. Women want to be with him, and men simply want to be him. Even if you're not a fan of Bond, chances are that you have at least seen one of his movies, because the movies have been around for over 50 years now. This is the longest ongoing movie franchise in cinematic history. And in these episodes we're gonna be taking a look at all of these movies. This is the very first episode, so we're going to be starting at where it all began. Back in World War II, an Englishman called Ian Fleming was working for the British Naval Intelligence. During that time, Fleming learned a lot about spies and secret operations. He promised himself that if he lived through the war, he would write a spy thriller to end all spy thrillers. And that's exactly what he did. Fleming had a house on Jamaica called Goldeneye. There he started writing. He wanted a bland name for his main character. Now he happened to have owned a book called Birds of the West Indies by James Bond.
I wanted a really flat, quiet name. And one of my Bibles out here is James Bond's Birds of the West Indies, which is a very famous ornithological book indeed. And I thought, well, now James Bond, now that's a pretty quiet name. And so I simply stole it and used it.
Fleming put lots of time and energy into writing these James Bond novels. It became his daily routine on Jamaica. Essentially, he based a lot of his characteristics on himself. You could say that Bond was his alter ego. The first Bond novel, Casino Royale, was released in 1953, and you could say that it was an instant success. Fleming would release a whole lot more of James Bond novels, one in each year. Eventually his first novel was adapted into a television series starring Barry Nelson as an American Bond called Jimmy Bond, and it wasn't much of a success. It wasn't until two ambitious filmmakers came along, one called Harry Saltzman and the other one called Albert Broccoli, or Cubby Broccoli as all of his friends would call him, and they formed a production company called Eon Productions, Eon standing for Everything or Nothing. They were Fleming's answer to finally adapting the Bond novels to the big screen. Unfortunately, the filmmakers didn't own the rights to Casino Royale, as Fleming had previously sold those rights, so they chose Fleming's sixth novel, Dr. No, to become their first James Bond epic adventure on a big screen. Of course, they had to find an actor to play James Bond. They took a risk by going with an unknown Scottish actor, Sean Connery. Fleming at first wasn't really fond of Connery at all. He thought Connery was too much of a country boy to play the suave and sophisticated character that he envisioned. The filmmakers also had to find a director for their first Bond movie, and that director became Terence Young. He was the man that showed Connery how to walk, talk, dress and be suave. Fleming eventually really started to like Connery as Bond. He even gave his Bond of the novels a Scottish background because of Connery. Anyway, in 1962, the very first James Bond movie hit the theaters, so let's now have a look at the movie. So, imagine going to the theaters in 1962 to watch the very first James Bond movie, and this is how it opened up. Now this little opening might have seemed dated in your eyes, but in 1962 this was as exhilarating as movies got. This Bond music you're hearing here was heard for the very first time ever, and nowadays it's one of the most well-known themes in the world. So you see all these circles and colors going crazy and the music is blazing out, and I really wonder what this must have been like in '62. Keep in mind that since this is the very first movie of this ongoing franchise, the budget they got really wasn't that high at all. Chances are that you won't like this movie much as a newcomer. Anyway, the movie switches to this catchy Jamaican song and we see three blind guys walking along on Jamaica. Also on Jamaica is this British secret agent called Strangways playing some bridge with his club of wooden actors that leave you hoping that the rest of the movie isn't as wooden as this.
My managing director is a creature of habit. He has a call put through to me every day about this time.
Anyway, hurry back before the cards get cold.
20 minutes.
Luckily the acting is a lot better in the rest of the movie. Then the three blind guys turn out to have perfect eyesight and kill Strangways. Then they drive over to his house, kill his secretary and steal the files on Dr. No and Crab Key with this overly dramatic dated music playing. And then the movie switches over to London, where we meet our suave hero for the very first time.
Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
And with that line, Connery proved that he was the coolest damn guy in the whole world. To me, this guy's Bond. You want to be him. He has everything down, the looks, the style, the self-confidence, the walk. It's no wonder Connery quickly became a star. He gets called off for business, but not before giving Miss Trent his card so that he can bang her later on.
My number's on the card.
When he gets to the office, we get introduced to Miss Moneypenny, played here by Lois Maxwell, who would continue to play Miss Moneypenny for the next 13 Bond movies coming after this one. The chemistry between her and Bond is immediately perfectly shown here.
You never take me to dinner looking like this, James. You never take me to dinner, period.
I would, you know. Only Anne would have me court-martialed for illegal use of government property.
Flattery'll get you nowhere, but don't stop trying.
We also get introduced to M, head of the Secret Service, played by Bernard Lee, who would also continue to play the role for a very long time. He informs Bond about Strangways' disappearance in Jamaica and he wants him to find out what happened to him. Then we get introduced to Major Boothroyd, played here by Peter Burton, who would later be played by Desmond Llewellyn in the following movies and be better known as Q. Bond movies are of course well known for their special gadgets, but in Dr. No that really doesn't play much of a role yet. He does however get his signature gun here.
Walter PPK, 7.65 mil with a delivery like a brick through a plate glass window.
So Bond sets off.
Ciao.
At his apartment he suddenly encounters Miss Trent again, who I have no clue how she even got into his place in the first place. But anyway, Bond doesn't seem to care, he quickly bangs her and then he starts his mission in Jamaica. So Bond strolls in at the airport with the Bond theme playing in the background like a total badass. This is by the way Connery's very first scene they ever filmed, just a little small fact there. Anyway, lots of mysterious people at the airport seem to be aware of Bond's arrival, like a mysterious man with his sunglasses and a mysterious photographer girl who gets all horny when Connery walks past her. And then there's this other mystery guy who is this driver who claims that he was sent out to pick up Bond, but Bond immediately gets suspicious of this and checks at the government house if they actually sent out a car for him, and obviously it turned out they didn't, so he gets into the car anyway to find out who this guy is working for. So later in a secluded area, Bond tries to persuade him to talk, but the man doesn't want to say a word at all, so this leads to a little fighting scene with some music playing that seemed to be taken straight out of a Tom and Jerry cartoon.
Get up.
Yeah, luckily the music is massively improved upon from the next movie onwards. Anyway, the driver says he will now talk if he can have a cigarette, so Bond lets him have a cigarette, but it turns out that there is cyanide in the cigarette and this guy commits suicide. In the next scene, Bond arrives at the government house to make his very first one-liner.
Sergeant, make sure he doesn't get away.
So upon arrival at the government house, Bond immediately starts his investigation to find out what happened to Strangways. So he goes all CSI and visits Strangways' house to look for clues, and he finds a blood patch and a picture of a fisherman with Strangways. Then Bond drinks his very first vodka martini at his hotel and proceeds to some cool spy routine. We see him powdering his briefcase with talcum powder and putting a hair on his closet. Both of these things were taken straight out of the Casino Royale novel, and I really like that they put it in here, especially since you don't really see the spy stuff as much anymore in the later movies. So Bond continues his investigation by talking to Strangways' bridge buddies, and one of them is Professor Dent, who I will talk about later on. Anyway, he finds out that the fisherman in the picture is called Quarrel, so Bond visits Quarrel, but like everybody in this movie, he decides to play all mysterious and doesn't say much, leading you to believe that he is actually a villain. So Bond ends up in the back room of a cafe and gets into a fight with Quarrel and the cafe owner Pussfeller, but he manages to outsmart them until the mysterious sunglasses guy from the airport shows up. It turns out that he is CIA agent Felix Leiter, played here by Jack Lord, and they all turn out to be allies, because letting you know immediately that they are friends would probably be too easy or something. So that evening Bond hangs out at the cafe with Felix and Quarrel, and you have this Jamaican music playing, cheerful people dancing, and this random guy who looks like he's having a seizure. And also the photographer girl from the airport is there again, so Bond tries to find out who she's working for, but just like the driver, she doesn't want to talk. She even gets out this light bulb and breaks the glass into Quarrel's cheek, and he's all casual about it. I don't know what's up with that, I sure would have responded differently. Anyway, they don't really get anything useful out of her.
One takes cyanide, another would have stood for her arm being broken, neither would talk. Who puts that sort of scare into people?
I think maybe we better find out, but fast.
Yeah, so the movie really goes for this mystery tone around it. We're watching how Bond is slowly trying to unravel it. He also learns about this island called Crab Key, a place that seems to be feared by everyone. It belongs to a Chinese guy and there isn't much known about him.
Except his name, Dr. No.
In the next scene, those blind men from the opening appear again and they try to attempt to kill Bond, but they fail. But they might have succeeded in damaging his ears with this music playing in the background though. The next morning Bond visits Professor Dent, you know, one of the guys that played bridge with Strangways, and Bond asks him some questions about Crab Key and Dent just acts all suspicious, and then he sets out to Crab Key himself to warn Dr. No about Bond. So it's kind of revealed that Dent is a villain, in case you didn't already find out yourself by now. We still don't actually get to see Dr. No, but we at least get to hear his voice.
Sit down.
And I just really like this bit, you know. You've got the big empty room made by Ken Adam, a guy that made a lot of the cool film sets for the Bond movie. And then there is the dark voice of Dr. No, which really makes him even more mysterious and menacing. And he orders Professor Dent to pick up this deadly spider to kill Bond, because shooting him would just be too easy. Even if tarantulas are proven not to be deadly, I still buy it myself. And then it's already night again. Wow, that day just flew by. What the hell did Bond do except for visiting Professor Dent in the morning? Anyway, Bond finds out that somebody has been in his room as his hair is gone on the closet and there are fingerprints on his briefcase. And when he goes to sleep, he is woken up by the spider. And they try to make this scene all tense, and I guess they kinda succeeded, even though the glass is clearly visible in some parts. It's still really well done stuff, especially for, 1962 standards. Bond ends up killing the spider with the music hilariously playing along. Classic. The next day, Bond asks for the files on Dr. No and Crab Key, but as we know, those were deliberately taken away in the beginning of the movie. He finds out that the secretary was meanwhile listening along through the keyhole, so he becomes suspicious of her. So what does he do? Well, he asks her on a date, of course.
What should I say to an invitation from a strange gentleman?
You should say yes.
I should say maybe.
3 o'clock at my hotel. Maybe?
I just love that dialogue. That's so cool. I should really ask my girl out in such a Bondian way one day. So Bond eventually goes to her place instead, and the assassins show up once again, and then we get one of the most dated car chases in the entire franchise. I mean, this might have been exhilarating excitement in 1962, but I really can't help but just always find this hilarious every time I see it. Yeah, and I know this is the first of its kind, so you gotta cut it some slack, and you know, I know the budget isn't so high. However, the budget was high enough to make this sudden explosion though. I mean, what the hell was that about?
I think they were on their way to a funeral.
So Bond shows up at Miss Tarot's house, and she's all surprised that the assassins didn't kill him. So we know that she's a bad chick, and it's clear that Bond knows this as well. So what does he do? Well, bang her naturally. The thing with Connery is he's just a damn charming guy. I could really buy that this woman would easily fall for his charms and sleep with him. At the same time, he also has something dangerous over him as well. That just makes him the perfect Bond to me. Anyway, Bond bangs her and then lets her be arrested afterwards, clearly just using her. And call me misogynist, but that's just an awesome move. She's a villain, so it's fine.
Be careful of her nail varnish.
You can imagine that was quite something else in 1962, you know, especially since this was one of the first movies on the big screen to actually show naked people being in bed together. So, you know, back then it was definitely a big deal. So Bond knows that eventually somebody would show up at Miss Darrow's house to kill him, so he puts some pillows under the sheets and waits until somebody shows up. Turns out that Professor Dent shows up and shoots the sheets. Then he just sits there being cool, and even if the professor is trying to reach his gun again, Bond lets him do this and simply says,
It's a Smith & Wesson. And you've had your 6.
One of the coolest and cold-hearted moments in the series, and it's just ridiculously awesome. In the next scene, Bond and Quarrel set out to Crab Key and spent the night there. The next morning, Bond wakes up to the singing of this movie's Bond girl, Honey Rider, played by Ursula Andress.
Come watch for the moon. La da 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 mango tree.
What are you doing here? Looking for shells?
No, I'm just looking.
This scene became very iconic in the franchise. You can already imagine the teens in the 60s witnessing her coming out of the water, in a bikini, in full color. Ursula Andress became the quintessential Bond girl, one of the most famous, if not the most famous, out of all of them. The producers casted her after they saw a picture of her in a wet t-shirt. That was apparently enough to get her the part. And I always had to laugh at Quarrel's expression here. You can tell that he was really thinking like, holy shit, why did he pick up this chick? And Crab Key turns out to be a very dangerous place indeed, as there are patrol boats, guards walking around in the swamp with dogs, and Quarrel even mentions a dragon.
You see, there's a dragon.
What?
And there's even a danger sign, so you know it must be dangerous there.
Let's get the hell out of here.
Listen, both of you. There are no such things as dragons. What you saw was something that looked like one. I'm trying to think what it was.
Here you can tell that both Quarrel and Honey are very superstitious and scared that there is actually a dragon roaming around, and Bond, you know, has to try and get some common sense into them.
Fetch my shoes.
Yeah, and that shows that the movie hasn't aged well on that front. You know, that was kind of a racist comment there to tell Quarrel to fetch his shoes, but oh well, you know, it's a product of its time, I guess.
What's it now? Look at me.
Those are dragon tracks. Oh, look, that's where he breathed.
Right, that looks precisely like a dragon trail. And when the supposed dragon finally appears, it's almost kind of funny. This is your dragon, folks.
That ain't a dragon, what is it?
A dragon that runs on diesel engines.
Quarrel and Bond try to shoot the machine and hope to find a weak spot, and then Quarrel dramatically gets burned to death, and that's actually quite sad. It leaves you with this pissed off feeling almost. Although to be fair, Quarrel could have at least worn something less obvious than a bright red t-shirt. Bond and Honey get captured by Dr. No's men and get taken to his secret lair. It turns out there was quite some radiation on the island, so Bond and Honey need to be decontaminated from radiation by taking a shower. And, no, I'm sorry gentlemen, but Ursula Andress isn't really naked in this scene. Believe me, I checked. After that, Bond and Honey are all of a sudden treated like first-class guests. They even get their own rooms in the villain's lair. That's something quite exceptional. I really like how this is done. Essentially they are prisoners, but that's not how they are treated. Bond and Honey do however get drugged and fall asleep. And at night we finally get a glimpse of Dr. No. It never really happens in a Bond movie that they hold off their villain for such a long time, as we're well over an hour into the movie by now. But we do find out that Dr. No has metal hands. And then in the evening, Bond and Honey have to get properly dressed to prepare for dinner with Dr. No. Yep, dinner with the villain. That is something typical for a Bond movie. So Bond and Honey arrive in Dr. No's suite, which is another beautiful Ken Adam film set. Then after 1 hour and 30 minutes, Dr. No is finally revealed.
$1 million, Mr. Bond. You were wondering what it cost.
Joseph Weisman is portraying Dr. No, and even though he doesn't really look Chinese at all, he has the creepy and intelligent trait perfectly down. A nice little Easter egg here in the movie is that they put a painting of the Duke of Wellington here in the suite, because that happened to be stolen around the time this was made. Just a little funny inside joke. The dinner scene is pretty classic as well. Dr. No reveals that he is a member of Spectre.
Spectre?
Spectre. Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, Extortion.
Spectre is the criminal organization that Bond has to face in a lot of the early Bond movies. And they will of course finally reappear in the 2015 Bond movie, as the title for that movie is recently revealed to be Spectre. Now Dr. No's evil scheme is to disrupt a space launch from Cape Canaveral using an atomic powered radio beam. And the plan is kind of irrelevant and boring, you know, it doesn't really matter that much. I guess you could say the plan was kind of suitable for its time, you know, the whole Cold War era and the Cuban Missile Crisis was still going on at the time. And it did update the original plan from the novel, which had something to do with bird shit. But all of this has nothing to do with the girl, so Bond requests Dr. No if she could be left out of this, and Dr. No agrees.
No. No.
I'm sure the guards will amuse her.
No.
It's a Dom Perignon 55. It would be a pity to break it.
I prefer the 53 myself.
Much like Honey, Bond also gets captured. He does try to escape through the air vent, but that doesn't immediately work. Now I've actually read the official Dr. No novel, and in there it was explained that Dr. No had this air vent made for Bond to be tortured in. That's why he first feeded him good food and gave him sleeping pills. He wanted full stamina on Bond's part so that he could test human endurance. However, none of that stuff is mentioned in the movie. Kind of a shame really, but oh well. In the movie the air vent is used as an actual escape route for Bond and his obvious stunt double. So Bond manages to make his escape and disguises himself in a radiation suit to infiltrate Dr. No's operation. This is where the final climax scene will take place, another great Ken Adam film set. So while Dr. No is overseeing the big space launch he attempts to disrupt with his little radio beam, Bond overloads the nuclear reactor just as the US rocket is launched. So shit kicks off, panic emerges and Dr. No and Bond end up in a fight above the nuclear cooling vent. Ultimately Dr. No loses the fight because of his metal hands and boils to death. I have to admit, this final climax scene was quite disappointing, but like I said, you don't really watch this for Dr. No's scheme anyway. So the US rocket is safe and Dr. No is killed, but Bond still has to save Honey while the place is going up in the meantime. So he finds her tied up to drown to death because villains just hate to kill you the easy way. Although they originally planned to have crabs there to slowly eat her alive, but they scrapped that idea. So the pair managed to make their great escape just as the whole place explodes. And then Felix Leiter shows up to give them a little hand. Oh nice, he's really going to give 007 a special thanks, huh? Oh, no, I thought she was going for some different method here, but oh well. So the movie ends with Bond banging Honey in the boat. Well, we are once again reminded that the movie has a terrible score. So that was the very first James Bond movie, and to me it's a pretty good start to the franchise. The movie became an international success and kicked off a franchise that is still running to this very day. That is something to credit it for. As you might have found out from this video, I'm a pretty big fan of Connery. He just immediately nailed the role. He's just quite simply perfect in my eyes. And sure, the movie also suffers from some bad moments. Not a great score, outdated, fake looking rear projections, a climax that really wasn't that great either. It does, however, feature some of the most iconic moments in the franchise. Ursula Andress, despite having quite a bland role, is however one of the most respected Bond girls in the series. Wiseman as Dr. No was solid despite not having much screen time. Notice how he never blinks in the movie. Now, if you're new to the franchise, chances are that you aren't that blown away by this first entry. But the series is ongoing and I'm willing to bet that some other ones will definitely blow you away. I really hope you guys enjoyed the return of my Bond stuff to my channel. Be sure to leave your thoughts on YouTube and I thank you a lot for watching.